Steel Path is hard, and that's because it's supposed to be hard. So it's no surprise that when new players finally finish the star chart and unlock the Steel Path, they tend to struggle. Hello everyone, I'm Aaron, or Flashes, it's whatever, and in this video, we're going to look at the reason why people struggle with Steel Path when they first unlock it, and how to get over this initial hurdle. This video is also going to be great if you're just struggling with high level missions, so stay tuned. The main reason for the increase in difficulty is, well, because there's been an increase in difficulty. It sounds silly, but let me explain. In Steel Path, all mission levels are increased by 100 levels. This means all the enemies that are usually, say level 20, are now going to be 120. In addition to this, all enemies have an additional 150% of both their health and their armor, so that's a total of 250% health and armor. And compared to this, the player gets no buff, so it's no wonder that there's a sudden and abrupt moment of feeling powerless. You might have been shredding through the star chart with your build, but at the end of the day, the missions you were completing were only low level. Throughout the star chart, the highest level missions you're going to encounter are around 50 to 60, and that's in this diamond, and there is one mission, Circulus, which is 80 to 100 on Lua, but even these missions aren't super hard to get through. And I know what you're thinking, but stop right there. I know that a lot of players do have grief about these level 50 to 60 missions, and I agree that it does have the capacity to be difficult if you haven't been building your equipment properly. Don't worry, if this describes you, then this video is super relevant as it'll basically change your life. The point I'm trying to make is that the base star chart can be completed with little to no knowledge of the mechanics of the game, and little to no effort either. When these players get to the Steel Path, they get overwhelmed when their basic, low effort builds just don't work anymore. What you need to do to stop sucking in Steel Path is to fix your Warframe build. There is no exact right or wrong way to build, but there are some general guidelines you should try to follow. In just 7 steps, we can have a completed build that's going to be ready for Steel Path and higher level missions. I'm going to be using my Nova as an example in this video since I've already showcased her before, and I encourage you to follow along with the Warframe of your own. It doesn't have to be Nova, it can be any Warframe. The principle will still apply. So, step 1, we need to understand what our Warframe's abilities actually are, and this means reading. So we're going to go to the Abilities tab here. I know you just want to get into playing the game, but trust me, a little bit of reading is going to do wonders for your understanding of certain abilities. And as you're reading, try to identify what I'm going to be calling ability types. So this is just something I've made up on the spot. So there are 9 types of abilities consisting of damage, damage reduction, energy, heal, status, maneuverability, buff, summon, and utility. Of course, not every single ability in the game is going to be easily categorized into one of these 9, and almost always abilities are going to have multiple types, but this will help understand what the idea of your frame's abilities actually are. So I'm not going to go over Nova's abilities in this video as it will become way too long, but if you're curious, then just watch my Nova build video. I'll put a card up here, and there's also going to be a link in the description. I will outline the ability types though. Nova's first is damage reduction as the main type, and status as the second. You'll see why it is a status ability later. Her second is purely damage. Her third is maneuverability, plain and simple. And her fourth is status. Step 2. Next, we're going to choose how we want to play. Very rarely will you use a frame and use their abilities equally or not have some process to bring more out of an ability. What we need to do is pick and choose abilities and things our frame can do that we want to play around. Something that is the main thing we'll be doing in missions, and this main thing doesn't just have to be killing enemies. For example, Ivara can be the most overpowered stealth frame, and if that's what you want to build her for, then you can definitely do that, but by doing so, your Ivara is probably not going to be exceptionally strong at, say, killing hordes of enemies like Nova is. For our build, I'm going to be building around her second ability, as it can do astronomical numbers for damage. My main process will be to use my first for damage reduction, and have that sustain itself throughout the duration of the mission, periodically cast my fourth to prime all enemies in the vicinity, and then shoot my second ability with a strong weapon, and then send it off to obliterate them. Clearly, I am building for shredding through hundreds of enemies. This build, this Nova build, isn't exactly built for single target damage though it can do it, but there are insane things you can do, such as taking acolytes down in like 0.2 seconds. I mean, this will do it in like 1 second, say, but like there is a difference, a noticeable difference. Also, would I use this build for a stealth mission? Definitely not. But would I use it for steel pot survival? 100 times yes. Step 3. This next step is the big one. There are 3 things that you want to always make sure your build has, and this checklist is basically essential when it comes to higher level. Sure, certain builds can bypass occasionally by tanking 1 item from the checklist, but in most cases, you definitely want to have all 3. What am I talking about? Well, that would be the big 3, which is survivability, energy, and damage. These 3 things are essential to almost every Warframe, but what do I mean when I say something like your build has to have survivability? Well, there are many ways to achieve survivability, for example, by damage reduction, or by healing, or by invulnerability, or by invisibility, and so on. Whatever improves your frame's ability to stay alive. For energy, it would be whatever allows your frame to generate energy, store energy, recycle energy, etc, etc. And for damage, it's simple, it would be whatever allows your frame to do damage. So you need to check off all 3 of these things, but I think it's easier to just show you what I mean. Let's start with survivability. On our build, we're going to be making use of the damage reduction of our first ability, but it isn't good enough on its own, so we'll mod for it. We'll use adaptation to bring our cap up from 90% damage reduction to basically 99%. In addition to this, we're going to run equilibrium. Because of our passive, Nova is going to be generating a lot of orbs, both energy and health. So by getting health back every single time she picks up an energy orb, it's going to keep healing us and keep us alive. Moving on to energy, as I just mentioned, we'll be using equilibrium to give us energy from health orbs. With Nova's slow and speed ability, you have to understand that slowing enemies does make them easier, they do less damage, they're easier to hit, and so on, and speeding them up has the opposite effect. In higher levels, you're probably not going to want to speed those hard enemies up, so most of the time you'll use the slow effect. However, as you've noticed, the slow effect only generates health orbs. This is why equilibrium comes in clutch for energy generation, as we'll get energy even when we're slowing enemies and picking up the health orbs. Other than this, we have prime flow to make sure that there's somewhere for that energy to be stored and for us to have access to at any time. Finally, let's talk about damage. We're getting our damage from our second ability, which scales with ability strength for the actual damage output and range for the radius of the explosion. This means that we should just include a mod to increase our ability strength and one to increase our ability range. So we're going to be using blind rage, which is the easiest way to get ability strength and the most as well. And for ability range, we're going to be using stretch. And here's a neat way to just figure out what mods do what if you can't remember the names. If you need range, just type up range, and then you'll get all the mods which are involved with range. So for us, we're going to be using stretch. So there we go. We've gotten through the checklist, and now our frame has a means of not dying, a means of having energy, and a means of dealing damage. So what's next? Step 4. Now is the time for your personality to shine through. By this point, our build isn't completed, but it's almost there. Most of the time, you'll have some slots free at this point, like the Aura, the Exilis, the Arcanes, and don't forget the Archon Shards. It's completely up to you what you want to do. Do you want to scale an attribute even higher? Go ahead. Do you want to make yourself more tanky? Be my guest. Do you want to negate the effects of the other mods we used previously? Yeah, maybe don't do that. But it's completely up to you at this point. I opted for a way to keep my first ability up all the time. These 2 augments, Molecular Fission and Neutron Star, allow Nova's antimatter particles to prime enemies for me, restore themselves, and deal heat procs all around me. My Aura and Exilis is just my preference, so I'm going to be using Corrosive Projection for the Aura. And for the Exilis, I'm just going to see if I can increase my range a little bit further than 145%. So I'll put that in here. For my Arcanes, I'm going to see if I can get my strength even higher. I'm going to be using Molt Augmented. And I'm also going to be using Molt Vigor. My Arcanes are there to scale my ability strength as I keep getting more kills. These 2 Molt Arcanes are a really good way for a build that scales with strength to keep its damage up in endurance missions. The Archon Shards that I'm running just make the build more comfortable. Step 5. Optimize. This is either the easiest step or the most difficult one. Think about any and every way you could optimize your build. For example, with my first ability, at base duration, it spawns 12 particles. Now, with my strength, that means that each particle grants 9% damage reduction, meaning that I would have a total of 108% damage reduction with all 12 particles. Obviously, the damage reduction caps at 90%, which means that I have 2 particles left over, which are free to shoot off at an enemy, and my damage reduction will still remain at the limit. This is, quite frankly, shit. That's about 2 seconds before my damage reduction starts to diminish. I use prime continuity to increase my duration, and as such, increase the number of particles of my first ability from 12 to 16. Now I can lose up to 6 and still have the full 90% damage reduction. 6 seconds compared to 2. That's 3 times as long for the particles to have a chance to kill the enemies on their own, or for me to just manually kill the primed enemies and restore them myself. Before we move on, I also want to mention the efficiency. Usually, you would try to fix that awful 50% efficiency in this step, but upon careful consideration, it turns out that we're not going to be needing to fix that at all. So why can I just pull that fact out of my ass? Because it isn't out of my ass. It's because of the next step. After all that work, there's just one more thing you should do before you can call your build complete. See, we've been working with a lot of theory, and sometimes our theory can be completely wrong. What we should do is test every component of the build to make sure it does what it's supposed to do. In my case, for example, I tested if the efficiency actually had a noticeable effect, and what do you know? It didn't at all. Even with bad efficiency, my Nova generates so much energy that it's straight up just negligible. With that, it looks like you've completed all the steps, and that must mean your Warframe is fixed and ready for the steel path. I want it to be known that I do not consider this video to be a tutorial, but more so of a guide. I'm not showing you how to build any particular frame, but rather, I'm trying to teach you the intuition that goes into building a frame. Hopefully this has been insightful to you, and I hope that you have a much easier time in Steel Path and higher level missions. I can almost guarantee that if you follow the steps I outlined, you'll find immediate success with all of your builds. If it isn't your frame, but rather your weapons that are shit and are holding you back, I'll be making a video soon for how to build your weapons, and as soon as I build it, I'll put it in the description and put up a card as well. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's completely free, and it would help get this video to more people. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope you have an excellent day. Bye.